Enjoy the still nice weather with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals, ready to eat in just 2 minutes. No matter how busy you are, you'll have the time to enjoy these delicious and nutritious meals. With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, from breakfast to dessert. Factor meals are restaurant-quality meals, featuring premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. Choose from 6 menu options. Factor meals are ready to eat in 2 minutes, so no shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleanup. Head to factormeals.com/mostshocking50 and use code MostShocking50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month. That's code MostShocking50 at factormeals.com/MostShocking50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month, while your subscription is active.
NetCredit is here to say yes to a personal loan or line of credit when other lenders say no. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partners. NetCredit. Credit to the people.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
If you're a facilities manager at a warehouse and your HVAC system goes down, it can turn up the heat, literally. But don't sweat it, Grainger has you covered. Grainger offers over 1 million industrial-grade products for all your operations, including warehouse HVAC maintenance. And even better, they offer access to experts and fast delivery, so you and your warehouse can both keep your cool. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Your dining room is the heart of your home, where meals are shared and memories are made. At Ashley, you'll find affordable dining furniture in a range of classic and modern styles. Ashley's small space sets and extendable tables are designed to fit beautifully into any space, from cozy breakfast nooks and kitchens to formal dining areas fit for a feast. And with mix-and-match seating options, everyone at your table gets the perfect seat. At Ashley, style is served. Shop in-store or online today.
Sam.
Dougie.
It is episode 5. Congratulations to us. But you know Sam, who isn't particularly happy at the moment. Teams towards the bottom end of the Premier League. Today we are discussing whether it is now impossible for newly promoted sides to survive in England's top division.
Burnley on the brink. The championship beckons for them.
Sheffield United, the first team relegated after their defeat at Newcastle today.
There's a lot of naivety within this team, and one place where you will not get away with it is the Premier League. You will just not get away with that. You need experience and you need to have know-how.
All 3 newly promoted sides at the bottom of the table, could we potentially see all of them go down as well?
Mistake there from McCarthy. Isak, Joelinton!
I think the teams that are coming up are pretty poor as well. I mean, Ipswich, credit to them and the manager, Kieran McKenna, or they're going to learn the hard way that the Premier League is more than one league above the Championship.
I, Dougie Critchley, am joined by Sam Tighe and producer Jack Collins. Jack, how are we doing?
Not too bad, thank you, Dougie.
Great to have you with us. And Sam, back from Canada.
Yes.
How was Canada?
It was awesome. Look, this is being recorded on a Tuesday. As it stands, very jet-lagged. Still, despite returning on the weekend, blame my 8-month-old son. Travelling this way across the globe with a baby is very different. I wasn't prepared.
Fair enough. The lack of sleep, we'll see where we enter with this podcast as well, because it could be Well, we're going to try and make sure it's not dreary, but there are some dreary situations going on at the bottom of the end of the Premier League, the dark side, if you were, because as we record this podcast on the 1st of October, 2024, there are 5 sides who are yet to record a win this season, with Everton breaking their duck at the weekend. That includes all the newly promoted sides. As we record this as well, we've just watched Southampton get quite heavily beaten by Bournemouth.
Oh dear.
Yes, it was a very much an oh dear situation. Ipswich probably looking the brightest, but we'll discuss this during the course of this podcast. Of course, last year, all 3 newly promoted sides went straight back down. I think the odds are quite high that the same might happen this year without meaning to be too negative. So let's see where we get to during the course of this podcast. We're going to discuss whether it is now impossible for them to survive, who is most likely to survive, and what has kind of changed, if anything, with the situation between the clubs going up from the Championship and whether they can now stay in the Premier League and whether that is realistic. So Sam, let's kick off with what has happened in the last few years in terms of newly promoted sides going back down, because the picture seems like it has changed a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got 2 very contrasting previous campaigns, haven't we? Because last season, each of the 3 sides that came up went straight back down again, and went straight back down like by a fair margin. Like, yes. It wasn't really that close. You look at the table, and Luton sat there on 26 points. They look quite close. They're only 6 points off safety. It's only a couple of wins, but obviously Forest are the next team up, and they've got a -4 for PSR breaches. So in effect, it's 10 meritable points, which is it. I know it's double figures, but like it literally feels so much bigger than 6, right? Because 2 wins, but it's 3 wins and a draw. It's big ground. Burnley down there on 24 and Sheffield United on 16. They conceded 104 goals over the course of the season. But the year before, it was Leicester, Leeds and Southampton that all went down, which meant that all 3 promoted sides stayed up. It was only the 4th time that has happened since the PL was incepted. And it was the first time since 2017-18 that all 3 promoted sides managed to stay up. So fair to say, it's even when all 3 stayed up, it's a massive rarity. And based on what happened the following season, it's fair to say that wasn't exactly a yardstick or a benchmark to be moving forward from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a particularly bleak campaign last year. I mean, I think Sheffield United was the 3rd lowest points tally in Premier League history, behind only Derby County and my beloved Sunderland under Mick McCarthy as well. And you consider the sides that were just above them. You know, Everton was supposedly in a survival, you know, had issues all season. They eventually finished 14 points clear, and that was with a 6-point deduction. You talk about what happened with Sheffield United.
It was an 8-point deduction in the end, wasn't it?
8-point deduction, of course. Sorry, my bad. But you talk about what happened. The average points tally of the sides that went down last year was 22 points. There has only been 2 previous seasons where the average for the newly promoted sides was below 32. So it did feel like a notable drop off. So I suppose what we need to discuss is whether that was just 3 poor teams or whether there is something more systemic going on with the gap between the Championship and the Premier League. Why do you think, and I think we should probably kick off with money, Sam, do you think that is the biggest factor why there seems like there's an ever-increasing gap between the Championship and the Premier League?
Well, I find it very interesting, just picking up on basically what I said a minute ago with Luton. The closest team to Luton last season was Forest, who were dealing with a points deduction. Why did they get a points deduction? Because they overspent the year before. So Forest, who survived the year before by the skin of their teeth, like it was so close. And I remember that final win at home, the relief that poured out of the stands. It was so closely run. And now we know that they did that having overspent on the margins because they suffered a points deduction the year after. And they still came pretty close the year after, obviously, surviving by 6 points, albeit 10 on merit. So that just tells you like how tough it is, I think, for even a big spending, newly promoted team. Because Forest, boy, they made some signings. We made so many jokes about it. Endless jokes, so many goalkeepers, you know, all that stuff. They just spent and signed. And Jack, I don't know if you've got the figure, or you can get the figure, but it was over 20 players in that over the course of that first year, and they weren't exactly shy the year after, and they've not been shy since. Even then, they needed to kind of overspend a little bit just to get over the line, and then dealing with that deduction, they were able to just about stave it off and finish 17th. So I look at Forest there last couple of years. I think they're a real poster boy for even if you spend, boy, is it tough.
Yeah, absolutely. It really, really is. I mean, there have been 12 occasions when 2 or more newly promoted sides have gone down immediately, and 3 of those have come in the last 4 seasons, 6 in the last 10. Wolves in 2018-19 were the last newly promoted side to finish in the top 8 in the last 17 seasons. So not only is it difficult to stay up, but it's very difficult to even establish yourself in mid-table. And I think a big part of that does come down to the financials. You know, Man City earned £176.2 million from winning the Premier League title in 22-23, which was up 15% on the previous year. Each of the 20 clubs in the Premier League were guaranteed £91.7 million. That same season, Norwich, who earned the most revenue in the Championship from TV money, they brought in £76 million. So the gap between the first side in the Championship and Everton, in terms of TV revenue, was £44.5 million. So it just feels like there has been a huge unfair system set up that unless you're in the Premier League, unless you're getting that TV money cash cow, you are always going to be really up against it. There's an interesting time to bring you in, Jack, actually, because Fulham your side have been up and down in recent years, but have managed to establish themselves now in the Premier League and are now upwardly looking, I would say, and maybe looking at top 12, maybe in a top 10 finish this season.
What do you finish, Dougie?
What do you think?
So when you say established as well, it's 2 years, isn't it?
This is our 3rd season.
Yeah, so it's actually not even that established.
True. But actually, I think that you look at the last 6 seasons or 7 seasons, Fulham have been in 5 of them.
Yeah.
So like that is the kind of yes, okay, there, and I think that yo-yo element does probably add to this, and we had that reputation for a while, and rightly so, because it's exactly what we were doing. But you do kind of look at it and think, well, yes,
but prize money is a big one as well. You see how much gets divvied out, and it's per spot, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's about £2.5 million difference per spot everywhere you go down. So if you can survive in there and hang in there for a while, it's literally worth hundreds of millions.
Sure, but parachute payments are as well, right? And I'm sure we'll come on to that. But I think that whilst you can look at Fulham, and actually there's a decent example in terms of how you build a squad in the Championship to actually be able to compete when you come back up. I think the better example is Brentford. And I've very rarely said that in my entire life.
Didn't like
but
that,
I do think it's important to kind of look at how they went about their business. Fulham have an owner who is willing to spend. He hasn't always done so, but is willing to spend, is willing to kind of fork out 20 odd million for players, and did so when Fulham came back into the Premier League. Brentford didn't really do that until 2 seasons into their Premier League tenure. And I think that's the interesting one in terms of looking at squad building and thinking, well, that's how you go about it if you're actually doing it in a sense that isn't just kind of chuck money at this. Forest spent 200 million euros for what it's worth according to Transfer Market. So what, about 170 odd million pounds?
A lot.
That's a lot of money in their first season up there.
Yeah, it's a lot, yeah. Look, Brentford are a great example of how to do this, but we'll probably just park them for now. We'll definitely come back to them later, because while we're on the financials, I think we do need to talk about PSR. Like, obviously, PSR has teeth. That cannot be questioned any longer. And I think for a while, it was almost ridiculed in people's minds. It's been in place. A lot of people don't know this. It's been in place for like 8 years.
Yeah, a long time.
But like, COVID meant that it kind of got put on the back burner, and then like there was a lot of allowances given off the back of that. And really only in the last couple of years has it come into full force. So it's been in place for a while, but only very recently have we seen it bare its teeth. And now Everton and Forest have felt the full wrath of that. And other teams have been very, very close. Obviously, the ridiculous pre-June 30 period for a handful of clubs in the Premier League show you like just how bad this can be. And Newcastle scrabbling up until the deadline in particular show how scared they were of probably getting a -10. Without any reprieve. So maybe these clubs were getting promoted in the past, let's go with 7, 8 years ago, anything pre-COVID, and they were going, well, you know, technically there are some spending rules, but let's just go for it. And maybe they weren't getting the repercussions, and maybe it wasn't such a deterrent. And then finally, now, that threat exists. And so already you're trying to bridge quite a big gap. Forest did it by spending 200 million euros. It was too much money, and they got docked with a -4 the following year, and obviously struggled as a result of that. So maybe in the past, when there was more success from those promoted teams, the rules weren't quite as stringent, which would allow an ambitious club to get promoted and spread their wings. Whereas now, not only do you have a competitive disadvantage to deal with, but you have a financial one too, because you can't spend as much.
Absolutely. It feels like the drawbridge has been pulled up on rampant spending. And you look at I said well-established Fulham. It feels like they're well-established, but as you said, only their third Premier League season. But they are buying players from Arsenal. They are buying Joachim Andersen, who's probably a top 8 player. Yep. Any of these newly promoted sides, were they going to get in the mix for these sort of players? Absolutely not. You look at Bournemouth, they signed players from FC Porto, Juventus, Barcelona, Lyon, Roma in the last 3 windows. Wolves have now been in the Premier League for 6 seasons, Brighton for 8, Palace for 11. Everton have never been relegated, and they probably, of all the Premier League clubs in that sort of that I've just discussed, feel the closest to it, and that is because of financial mismanagement. So these sides have been buying £20 million or more players for years now, and now the gap feels almost impossible to breach. I mean, you look at some of the business that Southampton did this summer, Sam, which I know you would have been across. They're signing... after selling, in the last few windows, Lavia, Livramento, Ward-Prowse, Teller, Salisu, their summer signings are Ben Brereton Diaz, who had a good spell at Sheffield United last year, but is he a Premier League level player? Debatable. Archer, Downs, Harwood Bellis, Mateus Fernandes. These are very inexperienced players. None have really done it in the Premier League. Does it feel like it's now impossible for newly promoted sides to get there on business alone? They kind of need to develop their own players, and maybe Tyler Dibbling will be that guy that kind of carries them to safety. But on business alone, it feels like they are at such a disadvantage.
Yeah, like we've said, even if you spend tons and tons of money, there's no guarantee you spend that money well, and there's no guarantee that money will have you sailing clear. And so I'll draw another example, and it's one that was very closely linked to Fulham, because Aston Villa were accused of doing a Fulham in 2019 when they had to basically build a new squad because they got promoted off the back of a series of loanees and free transfers. And it was Albert Adoma, Ahmed El Mohammadi. They were going to have to be phased out. Tammy Abraham on loan, that sort of stuff. Survived by the skin of their teeth. 35 points to Bournemouth's 34. A draw on the last day against West Ham got it done. This was with Jack Grealish in the team.
Close.
Even with Grealish, so what you mentioned there about having a spectacular homegrown talent to really level the playing field, even with Grealish and John McGinn and Douglas Luiz, 35 points, skin of their teeth. So it was a big spend. It was a lot of money, a lot of players brought in, and they still had that core to rely on. And they had a £100 million player, future to be £100 million player in the ranks, and they still barely did it. Barely managed it. It was absolutely ridiculous. Southampton are, even before they were relegated last year, they were operating under a cap of we're only spending a maximum of £15 million per player, which is going to get you absolutely nowhere in the current Premier League. And you just kind of mentioned or reeled off a lot of interesting signings that these teams have made. And it does lead me to a conclusion, because I was looking at it myself, that a lot of these, we're going to call them established Premier League teams. So anything from 10th to 16th, the cluster of teams that anyone, if you get promoted, you're looking at those 6 and going, which one of you can we draw in?
Down,
who can we claw down here with us? They're signing so well, and it's not just about being able to spend the money. It's about having the wage structure in order to support those signings, which you only get from making Premier League money year on year. But aren't they getting smarter as well? We do criticise some teams for wasting money, but Bournemouth have signed, Zabani, Semenyo, Kirkes, perfect fits for their style, and Semenyo is absolutely awesome. Palace in the last 5 years, 3 years even, Olise, Eza, Wharton, Gay, and Fulham with Palhinha, Iwobi, Anderson, Smith Rowe. Leno was a fantastic signing, probably didn't cost very much money, Jack, 5 million?
1.8 rising to 2.6.
Unbelievable.
That is absolutely ridiculous. And in Brentford with, Johan Visser and Fabio Carvalho even this summer, and Forest, I'll just name check them as well because they got Callum Hudson-Odoi for £5 million, along with Murillo, Elanga, Danilo, and Morgan Gibbs-White. That was an expensive one, but fair play.
Milenkovic was very cheap as well.
And Milenkovic as well, a guy who's played a Conference League final. But I just want to narrow in on Evan Nilsson briefly as well. Yes, Bournemouth got given £65 million for Dominic Solanke, so they had money. But you still can't afford to spend 40 of that on Evan Nilsson unless you have a wage structure in place that allows you to pay that player. Because Evan Nilsson isn't swapping European nights in Porto for Bournemouth, no disrespect to Bournemouth, for just 40 grand a week. That's not happening. And the fact that Bournemouth are signing a Champions League caliber striker It honestly, it must.
Who Manchester United were linked with last week, but let's just remember that for a little while. Whether that was a good idea or not, it's kind of by the by. But that's the player that Bournemouth have now gone out and signed.
Yeah, it must honestly just send shivers down these promoted teams' spines. Looking at that spending capacity, wage capacity, and trying to bridge that competitive disadvantage. I mean, it must be terrifying.
Yeah, I can't imagine it as well, especially because teams like Leicester, newly promoted, who felt like an established Premier League side, but you look at Chilwell, Maguire, Maddison, Barnes, the quality of player they've let go over the last 5-6 years, very difficult to replicate that on a consistent basis. I mean, Southampton did it for years, selling very effectively, replacing very effectively. It eventually caught up with them.
It always will.
Brighton seems to be doing quite a good job at it. To be fair, of replacing well, but it is an uphill battle to maintain performance levels if you're selling your best players that regularly.
But also if you're losing your manager that regularly.
There is also a thing that I think it was Jacob Tanswell in The Athletic wrote about, and he called it, the difficult second year isn't really a thing anymore. If you stay up one year, you're actually got a pretty good chance of staying up again.
Yeah, second season syndrome, we used to call it.
He calls it the difficult sixth season. Now, that sounds a bit ridiculous, but actually I think he's probably got a point, because if you come up and stay up, then you get yourself into a cycle, right? Yeah. And it's only once that cycle ends and maybe you've pushed yourself up the table, and Southampton are a good example of this, right? Push yourself up the table, your manager might get poached, or maybe the era runs out, the cycle runs out, you have to sell some of the better players. You're basically, unless you're Brighton, who seem to, as you say, continue to replace at really high levels, but also have the capacity to make mistakes now financially because there's so much in the coffers. Yeah. They now have that ability. Whereas if you're selling those players for 30, 40 million, let's say that everyone's not a Moises Caicedo, then suddenly, every replacement has to be right. Yeah. And the one season you get that wrong, you're in trouble. Now, you might not get relegated, but you're going to be in the scrap. And actually, I think the sixth thing comes from the end of that cycle. You could probably push 6 years out of any cycle. But actually, it's when it comes to the end of that, and if you haven't done what Brighton do, and it doesn't mean that Brighton are the only club that can do it, but if you haven't replaced effectively, you're suddenly sliding back towards that trapdoor. Everyone but the big six can get relegated, right? Like that is the ultimate thing of it. If you have 2 bad seasons, you're probably getting relegated.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it does come down to that money thing that you're talking about. But I don't think it's quite as black and white as Premier League Championship. I think it's that there is just a set of clubs now that have too much capacity to be able to be dragged into that. And everyone else is kind of just at the beck and call of being clever, as you say, right? Being clever all the time and actually making sure that continues. And if it does, then maybe we do need to talk about this in more depth. But that's where I'm at on it.
Yeah. I mean, even looking at the bottom of the Premier League table at the moment, like sides like Wolves, sides like Crystal Palace, I mean, Wolves maybe, but does anyone see Crystal Palace being in a relegation scrap come May? Like, I just personally don't. And a factor that I think we probably need to get onto is the sort of respect Premier League clubs now show to clubs in the Championship, particularly regarding their best players. If you're excelling in the Championship, there's been so many proven players that have gone from the Championship and instantly kind of made it in the Premier League already.
I just listed a bunch, didn't I? I think Palace signed them all.
Well, exactly. I mean, so these players were signed straight after relegation. Lavia, Maddison, Barnes, Ake, Livramento, Ward-Prowse, Odegaard, Pickford. Or they are either bought, if they're excelling in the Championship, with no Premier League experience. Look at, or very little, Ruter, Archie Gray, João Pedro, Ollie Watkins, Jude Bellingham's a very good example, Somerville, Yorkeres, Elise, Eze, Benrahma, Bowen. So many top Championship players now can get a move to an established Premier League club rather than going up with their side, earning their stripes there, because it feels like Premier League scouts see the Championship as perhaps more of a proven example of Premier League level rather than maybe abroad in some ways that they used to. I don't know. It feels like the Championship's respect level amongst the Premier League has really improved.
I think it's a pretty clear and easy enough pathway to move from Championship to Premier League if you're good enough. I think having proved yourself in the Championship already, it removes a lot of the question marks. Like it's and some of this is obviously just some of those cliches that people fall into. But cliches do exist for a reason. Can he cope with the speed of the game, the physicality of the game? It's a development of could he do it on a wet, windy night in Stoke, that sort of thing. But like, if you've already done it on a wet, windy night in Stoke, possibly on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, ideally, then you're probably not going to get fazed by too much else.
And dealt with that schedule as well. The Championship is relentless.
Yeah, so if you can survive 46 games like that, and you've got like people, and some of the tackles that the skilled players in the Championship sustain pretty bad. Like the treatment that Jack Grealish got, the treatment that Harvey Elliott got when he was at Blackburn Rovers, like nasty stuff, genuinely, 6 fouls a game, state of their shins, ridiculous. If you can survive that, and, Eza will have done that, Elise will have done that, Adam Wharton had been in that battleground for like the last year, then you've got absolutely no qualms, as long as you're sound on the technical stuff and you're happy with the quality and the room to grow. Absolutely no qualms, not only signing them, probably in January, but plugging them straight in, because there are only a couple questions left to answer, and that is, how good are you? Not, do you stylistically fit? Can you cope with the schedule? Are you okay with the weather? Because like so many players have come across and really struggled with the culture or the weather or whatever it is. A lot of people's hamstrings go in December.
Yeah.
And that's not just Joe Cole's. It's a thing. So the Championship removes a lot of question marks, and it only leaves you with just from a scout's perspective, it leaves you with one very simple question: how good can this player be? Not can he suit, can he fit, can he fit in?
Absolutely. It feels like as well that in the last few years, I think someone told me this a few years ago, I'm afraid I can't credit them because I can't remember who it was, but they said...
It's probably me.
Probably Sam. Probably the wise oracle that is Sam Tighe. But they said it's interesting to see the styles that come up from the Championship and do well in the Premier League.
Yeah.
Often if you try and play a more expansive style, we saw it with Burnley last year, we're seeing it with Southampton this year. We've seen it notoriously with Norwich. They were the example I was going to go for. The style that necessarily works in the Championship, which can blow away sides in the Championship, you then try and do that against a Premier League outfit that have fitter players, that have a deeper bench, that are used to playing teams that play that sort of way, which is rare in some cases in the Championship. You get kind of found out. Often the clubs that have excelled in the Premier League on their first year of promotion, I'm thinking Sheffield United in their first one under Chris Wilder, Nuno's Wolves. Obviously, Nuno's Wolves had huge backing at the time as well, which comes into the finances.
Ruben Neves and João Moutinho, and
going from the Champions League to a side newly promoted, or in Ruben Neves' case, came up with them.
Yeah.
It felt like they had to be a little bit more practical or a little bit more playing on the counter-attack, playing to their strengths.
Yeah.
Do you think that is now an issue in the Premier League? We kind of discussed this in the Pep Guardiola episode a few weeks ago as well, that maybe Premier League or the newly promoted Premier League sides aren't giving themselves enough of an opportunity because of the ideals that they're trying to stick to.
I think there are two very easy ways to go back down. One of them is to overplay. Now, I will not sit here and suggest that no one should try to play any football in surviving, but even some of the better teams that have just about survived by the skin of their teeth have had to resort to some pretty stodgy stuff. I'll reference Aston Villa again, when after the COVID break came back and basically just refused to attack.
And that line call helps as well.
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, that's true. Which game week do you think that was in, Dougie?
I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Is it 29 or 30?
Yeah, people talk about that like happened on the last day. It was like game week 29 or something. It's really funny. But yeah,
it was a big moment.
It did help. Of course it helps. Villa survived by 1 point.
Yeah.
And they drew that game. It all counts. But yeah, look, they had to basically rely on set pieces for those final 10 games, completely remodelled themselves. Whereas Norwich, who did consistently try to play some football that season, push the fullbacks nice and high and get 3 in midfield, conceded 75 and went down with 21 points. That's one way to go down. And right now you look at the Premier League and you're looking at Southampton's style and the amount of goals they're conceding, the amount of mistakes they're making, and you are, well, I am pretty concerned for them.
Yeah.
Norwich are a shining example of this, but you've talked about Burnley as well. I think that's fair. There's another subset of clubs that I probably just want to briefly mention, because we're sort of almost, you look at like who went up, who went down, how many. You almost look at it in like a statistical percentage. I'm not saying these clubs aren't trying to compete, but there are some clubs who come up and are more than happy to just take the cash and probably go back down. So it does skew the argument a little bit. And I'll say Luton Town, that look, they competed their asses off last season, no doubt about it. I'm not pouring scorn on any of their performances or players or the manager, but none of their transfer fees eclipsed £6 million.
Tough.
Which is a surefire way to not have enough quality in your squad to survive. And they're a club who think this money from the Premier League is life-changing for us long term. We can invest in our infrastructure, our scouting, we could build a new facility. Perfectly fine with that. Sometimes there are those clubs, and they never stood a chance. And sometimes you're Sheffield United last year, who they had ownership troubles in the summer. They sold their best player, Iliman Ndiaye. That's a white flag. Right from the off, that's a white flag. So some of them actually never they never even get to the point where they can compete.
With Luton, is that a point to like consider that someone could come up, not overspend, be like, actually, we'll build a bit of and look, Ipswich might be doing something similar in some regards this season, but I don't think it's quite the same. But kind of build a championship super squad, go back down and come back up again with more financial capacity and more, more willingness to maybe go out and spend that and try and compete. I don't think that's the worst strategy in the world.
Did Fulham do that?
Yeah, I was thinking about that with the Scott Parker.
Not really. Fulham just
You had an
spent loads
amazing
of money.
team that year.
Yeah,
I saw it on paper on Twitter the other day. It was remarkable to go down with that side.
Ademola Lookman, Andre Frank Anguissa. Yeah, I mean...
Anderson at the
Joachim
back,
Anderson,
Mitrovic.
Tursin, Mitrovic. Mitrovic didn't play that season because Scott Parker decided he wanted to play Ivan Cavallero up front instead, which is weird. But I suppose the counter, well, not counter actually, the stress of this is, what do teams that stay up look like? Because actually, and I think that what Fulham and Brentford both did very well, and Forest to an extent as well, but I think Forest had to do a little bit more of the Villa, bring in a new team, because actually everyone was either on loan or didn't have
Villa did a
anyone.
Fulham and then Forest did a Villa.
Yeah, well, but Fulham did sort of just didn't need to do that because they did in terms of quality.
They bought 2 squads.
They bought another squad, yeah. Look, anyway, it's by the by. What I mean is that the Fulham and Brentford that have stayed up, for example, both had identities in the Championship and tweaked it, rather than completely burning off. And the difference between Fulham, and obviously I can speak from experience here in the Championship and the Premier League that year, was Fulham played John McKelserry as the 6 in the Championship and dominated the ball and played loads of sweeping passes, but wasn't particularly physically dominant. They replaced him with Joao Palhinha. The rest of the team stayed pretty similar, right? And actually Brentford did something a little bit similar with the way that they came up. And yes, they upgraded a few parts in the middle of things, but they tried to stick to the same style, but with some tweaks to make it adaptable for not being completely and utterly dominant.
Yeah.
That feels like the methodology that everybody should be applying.
So I've got a couple of things to raise here, and it's almost like a blueprint, I think, of how to stay up.
Oh, lovely. Are you listening, guys?
And I think so. There's a common thread, and I think Jack's touched upon it there, which is being really physical and very, very good out of possession. It's really, really important these days. And I think when you look at Norwich and Burnley and those guys going down playing 4-3-3, and you look at Fulham under Marco Silva, every game that you play against Fulham is a fight. They press really well and really active off the ball. I think the recruitment was pretty well skewed towards dual winners, Palhinha, Andres Pereira, like he is a very different player to the one I remember coming through an academy. Like he works harder than just about anybody. Mitrovic, obviously, for the first season, embodies physicality. You got Brentford that did the same. Nuno's Wolves were the same. Nuno's Wolves, when they counter-attacked, jeez.
Yeah.
With
they went for it.
6-foot wing backs, 3 centre backs. Willy Bolly stood in the middle. Like they were a difficult team to play against. Like you had to level out the physical battle first, and then maybe consider the rest of it. And then obviously the crown prince of this is probably Marcelo Bielsa's Leeds, it's like playing against a hurricane. 90 minutes against a hurricane, that was. It was awful. I used to hate watching Villa play Leeds. Like, just made me feel exhausted, just sat there on the sofa. And what he managed to get out of those players from an out-of-possession standpoint and from just a dual-winning, a physical and a fitness perspective was enough to push Leeds into, I think they finished 9th, didn't they? I mean, they were top. They ended up in the top half. They were absolutely brilliant. So I think there's a common thread between a lot of these teams that not only stay up, but finish 11th or finish 12th. And it's the principles that I've discussed. And those 4 teams, I think in particular, have really embodied those.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair enough.
If you're a facilities manager at a warehouse and your HVAC system goes down, it can turn up the heat, literally. But don't sweat it, Grainger has you covered. Grainger offers over 1 million industrial-grade products for all your operations, including warehouse HVAC maintenance. And even better, they offer access to experts and fast delivery, so you and your warehouse can both keep your cool. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Your dining room is the heart of your home, where meals are shared and memories are made. At Ashley, you'll find affordable dining furniture in a range of classic and modern styles. Ashley's small space sets and extendable tables are designed to fit beautifully into any space, from cozy breakfast nooks and kitchens to formal dining areas fit for a feast. And with mix-and-match seating options, everyone at your table gets the perfect seat. At Ashley, style is served. Shop in-store or online today.
The other thing I've noticed is that there have been some very famous teams that have managed to stay up by being tactically quirky. And I love this because it actually gives us a lot of hope. Considering the discussion, the theme of the discussion, is it even possible? Is the gap too big? If you are tactically quirky, you have a better chance than most others. And that means you do something that's really different, kind of weird, and the teams in the Premier League aren't really ready for it, and it takes them ages to adapt. So my examples are, first of all, Stoke City, obviously under Tony Pulis.
The king of quirky.
It's the Rory Delap long throw, which for God knows how many years, 3 years, just absolutely flummoxed people. And it, despite the fact that
defenders were kicking it out for corners.
Yeah, exactly. They would rather concede a corner than a throw in. It was that powerful. It speaks to a lack of knowledge at the time, though. We're talking about back in about 2008, they got promoted, didn't they? They were in the Championship. They did play like 46 games in the second tier of English football, and then they moved up to the Premier League, and everyone was like, what, you've got a long throw? I think we know a lot more about football nowadays, thankfully. But I remember specifically, I was at Reading Festival in 2008. It was over the weekend. And obviously, back in the day, 2008, I don't think the iPhone had been invented. If you were at a festival, you were not getting any contact with the outside world, no chance. And they put the football scores up on the big screen, on the main stage, just to let everyone know how the football had gone. And Villa were playing Stoke. And naive little me thought we were going to win 5-0. Newly promoted Stoke, never heard of him. They're literally a founding member of the Football League, but never mind. Anyway, I'm an 18-year-old idiot at this point. And I looked up the screen and we lost 3-2. And it wasn't a double take; it was like a quadruple take.
And it's never left you.
Absolutely not. I can remember the late goal that won it. It was a Delap throw into Mamadi Sidibe. And like this, I couldn't believe it. And I'm pretty sure Martin O'Neill was also quite surprised, which is another conversation. But it took teams a long time to figure out Rory Delap and Ricardo Fuller. In fact, arguably they never did. Yeah. Rory Delap retired.
They were comfortable in mid-table for years.
Absolutely, they finished like 11th, 12th, 11th, 14th, 11th. It was brilliant. And they were weird. They were different. They punched you in the mouth, and teams really struggled with it, and it allowed them to get the edge on teams. Sheffield United, you mentioned them recently. Chris Wilder's overlapping centre-backs. Super weird. Again, they did it in the Championship. We should have been prepared. But the overloads they managed to create up the left and up the right, the centre-back coming up and crossing the ball in, not the wing-back. They were able to get into the box, to the byline.
Simone Inzaghi took notes.
He did indeed. They're just an Italian Sheffield United Inter, aren't they? Who was the guy? Jack, he went to play for Rangers. Big bum. Centre mid, Sheffield United.
Oh,
not John Fleck.
John Lundstrom.
Yeah, Lundstrom. Yeah. So Lundstrom was like unbelievable, like absolutely unbelievable. A poor man's John McGinn, but he and John Fleck were awesome together.
Jack Robinson was the overlapping centre back at the time, wasn't he? He suffered a really bad injury. I think he had to retire.
And was it Basham or was it
Chris Basham?
Jack.
I think Basham had a career ender as
well.
Jack O'Connell. Yeah. I mean, they were weird. It took teams a long time to figure them out. And just a word as well for Brentford, 2021 promoted, and probably one of these leading lights in like the wave of realisation that set pieces are actually just ridiculously important. Way more important than I think people had given them credit for. And you look at the top teams now, you look at the way Arsenal and Villa are like putting so much effort into creating those moments at set pieces. I think Brentford were doing it before both of them, and doing it before the rest of them too. And it was a big, big part of their survival plan, being different and being strange, but being effective from set pieces. I mean, they're even scoring from goal kicks now. They've said, okay, guys, you can have our corner routines, no problem. Liverpool, you can do the throw-in, coach. That's cool. We're going to score from goal kicks.
Modern day Stoke. They will punch you in the face, though. That's not really a criticism.
No.
They like long balls. They like flick-ons. Obviously, things have had to adapt recently with Ivan Toney leaving, but for years, they just literally won flick-ons and scored. There was nothing particularly... They were good tactically, but actually a lot of their most dangerous opportunities came from really basic Route 1 stuff. Yeah. They just knew how to do it better than everyone else. It's a massive compliment.
And they did long throws as well. I remember Ethan Pinnock get on the end of several of them, and they play in red and white stripes. So they really are Stoke. There you go. But these are just proof. And these teams are from 2021, 2019, and then back in 2008. So there's a good stretch of time between them. But they're all examples of teams who all play in red and white stripes. Now I said it, I can't unsee it. If you're slightly different, if you're clever, if you go against the grain, you have a chance. And I like to believe, Dougie, as we talked about through the finances, it's difficult. We've established that. But I like to believe that tactical quirkiness will give everyone a chance if they're clever enough and they plan hard enough.
I think so. I think that's a fair enough point. What's also interesting about Brentford is how clearly dialed in they are into analytics, which was maybe not a fact maybe 10, 15 years ago. I think last season in the Premier League, they took their shots from the closest distance to goal.
Yes.
And Thomas Frank, I remember, went on Monday Night Football and specifically talked about XG per shot and the less likelihood of scoring from distance, stuff that we all take for granted now. But they were definitely clearly, against shooting from distance, crossing into certain areas, but not. Also, I think last year as well, in terms of successful dribbles into the final third, successful take-ons, they're right down there. They are not overplaying it in the wrong areas. They are slowly getting into the opposition third and playing for set pieces, crossing really effectively. They completed double the amount of crosses last year as Man United, Chelsea and Sheffield United. Like, Brentford are quite a unique side, but fair play, they've always got a plan. And it feels like at the moment, the clubs that have come up are taking too long to adapt. And I think they've been helped by the fact Wolves and Palace have started the season slowly, Everton too. But in terms of going forward and who is most likely to survive, you look at Everton, I think, being handed a lifeline by this Friedkin Group takeover. They're going to spend in January, surely. And that just felt like the most likely candidate to be sucked down into this mess. Because, Palace have got a Europa League winning coach. They've got Eze, they've got Henderson, they've got Mitchell, they've got Gehi, they've got Wharton, Kamada, and Nketiah. These are not championship level players.
No.
And you look at Wolves, even Mateus Cunha signed for, I think, close to £50 million in the end when that obligation to buy was.
It was an awful lot, yeah.
It was a crazy amount of money.
He's a great player, though, isn't he?
Forest, we've already talked about it. They went through so many misses as it went, but they've now settled on a really solid starting 11, have a clearly defined way of playing. And you look at those newly promoted sides, and Southampton are trying to do something quite unique, but I think it's backfiring quite spectacularly. Ipswich, I think it's almost impossible to stay up after being promoted twice in a row. Yes, you spent £100 million, but a lot of those players were on top championship players. Your Jack Clarks, your Sammy Smodics, Calvin Phillips trying to rebuild his career.
Tell you what though, mate, Jack Clark's full debut wasn't bad.
He's an unbelievable player. I love Jack Clark. We're missing him heavily. But yeah, he is probably the example of a player that seems ready for the Premier League, but there's still a huge ask over a lot of their other summer signings. I mean, from what you've seen so far, Sam, and it is early days, are the three of them doomed?
What a horrible way to put it. I've got to say that if I was to pick one or the most likely promoted team to stay up, it would be Ipswich.
I was going to say Ipswich.
It would be Ipswich.
Yeah.
All right, you go first. Why them over the other two?
I think they've, for one, they've had a very difficult run of fixtures. And I think they've been in every game. Even against Liverpool in the opening game of the season, I thought they were really impressive for the first half. Yeah. It feels like they have almost the least to lose because there's the least expectations on them. I think they look organised. I like some of their, they've got some star players in there. They don't seem to care too much about the fact that they're not obsessed with, having a huge amount of possession, but they are effective with what they're given. There seems like a plan for every game. I think McKenna's a top coach. I think the signs are very good. Leicester, coming off the back of selling key players in the summer, losing Maresca, Dewsbury Hall leaving, PSR concerns. I can't see them finishing anything other than 20th, to be honest. You look even in the League Cup last week, having to go to penalties to beat League 2 Walsall. Things don't seem right there. The mood around the club is so depressing that feels like that will just suck them down instantly. Ipswich are fresh, ready to go. I think they, by far, look the strongest so far. And Southampton, I just don't think they've got the players, unfortunately, to pull off what we've been talking about in previous weeks as well. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Ipswich.
Yeah, Ipswich, I like the intensity with which they play, and I like the fact that they are more than happy to play reactively. Mm-hmm. I think the other two promoted teams are going to want to play proactively, and it may be to their detriment at points. Ipswich do not care how much of the ball they have, as long as they're able to get it to Liam Delap into the channel 5 times a game, as long as they're able to get it to their wingers 2 or 3 times. And they've got a good counter-attacking base to build out of. They've got a really hard tackling midfield. They've got good speed up front. Delap can jostle, but he can run.
Leif Davis has had some issues defensively, but he is a threat on the counter-attack.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, look, they're not going to keep many clean sheets. That's true. But Davis is a good set-piece taker, and he's got a lovely left foot in terms of a cross. Delap will have his ups and downs because he's very inexperienced, but he's a battering ram of a striker on his day. Clark's really good, and I think they'll be gritty enough to have a chance. I don't know if they'll do it, but I think they've got a chance. Whereas I'm not convinced I can say that about Southampton under based on the first 6 games that we've watched. I mean, they've played like 5 different people up front, which is a massive red flag. And they use they didn't really use a striker against Bournemouth, but it was like a 4-4-2, but it wasn't. And they'd come away from the 4-3-3, which was also a 4-2-3-1, and they started the season with this kind of weird hybrid back three with Jack Stevens.
They also feel very brittle when things go against them.
For sure, they do not, and Russell Martin said it on Monday night, once again, they did not react to a negative moment in a game, which is exactly what happened when they missed a penalty against United. They went on to lose 3-0 despite being the better team for 25 minutes. Red flags everywhere there. Unfortunately, have to be honest, and it has to be said. And then Leicester, I'm a fundamental believer in the fact that midfield is key, classic, but you either win and lose games in midfield a lot of the time between even sides. And I literally hate the midfield they've constructed.
I think they should be better on the midfield they've got better. Though Skip, Winks, Ndidi, I don't think they should be this bad.
So I'm not surprised that they can't keep up with teams because Winks and Skip are small guys. They're quite tidy, but they're not particularly aggressive or combative, and they don't cover those huge swathes of ground. And you look down the table and you're trying to compare them to teams, and you look at their midfielders, and they're all ball winners and duel winners. And watching Bournemouth last night, and once again, it's Lewis Cook and Ryan Christie setting the tone. That sort of thing. It's important, and I think Leicester have gone out and spent quite a lot of money on players that aren't right for this battle. So I struggle to believe in them as well. So that kind of leaves you with Ipswich. Just a word on Wolves. When they lost at the weekend, Lamina was crying.
Yeah, on the
Mario
pitch.
Lamina was crying. They're 6 games in, and yes, they're bottom of the table. Yes, they've got the worst goal. I mean, they've conceded 16 goals in 6 games. And also, they've come pretty close to winning or doing something in a couple of games, and it's just eluded them. And I was speaking to my brother-in-law the other day, and he goes, yeah, but look at the upcoming schedule. They've got Brentford coming up, and then Man City, get them out of the way. And then you've got Brighton, Palace, Southampton, Fulham, Bournemouth, Everton, West Ham, Ipswich, Leicester. It's a good schedule. Mm-hmm. But if you lose all your games and your confidence is flushed, you'll just lose the rest. I'm actually looking at Wolves' body language there and thinking oh geez, they've lost a player to an ACL injury already, and they look mentally crushed after 6 games.
They don't have any defenders.
Yeah,
they sold Max Kilman, and I was talking to someone I was on the radio last week, and on with a West Ham fan, and a Wolves fan texted into the show to be like, "Hey, Max Kilman, how's that going for you?" And I was like, "Well, it's still going better for West Ham than it is for you." And I'll be honest, it's not going great for West Ham. So we're at this point where Wolves kind of feel like they need to play a back 3, but they only have 3 fit centre-backs for the rest of the season. So they can't play a back 3 because you just can't get away with that. I think on Ipswich, just probably worth pointing out that they are a little bit Brentford light. If you actually look at the way that Delap and Amari Hutchinson are going to play, that's a little bit Mbeumo and Ivan Toney. You look at those. Obviously, Brentford have changed their system over the years, but the first year they came up playing with that 3 at the back, it really did. It does feel a little bit like that in terms of what Ipswich are doing. I completely agree with all of it.
I will say as well, actually, Ipswich do have this little X factor that I really like. As much as we love analytics, and this is where they're the complete opposite of Brentford. Brentford won't take a shot outside the box. Ipswich will. And you know what? Amari Hutchinson is going to score 3 screamers this year, at least. And they could be worth 4 or 6 points, genuinely. And that could be the difference again. McKenna does give those players that license, and I'm a fan of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so we're kind of thinking that Wolves feel like the likeliest to get sucked into there. What is worth considering is that we have mentioned the financial gap. We have mentioned what's been going on recently with the newly promoted sides. It might well change. Sky have, launched this brand new broadcast deal, 1,000 matches broadcast live per season, £935 million deal. Championship clubs on TV revenue, they're going to earn 46% more. League 1, League 2 clubs will earn 25% more. Until that kicks in, there's still going to be a gap. And I think, it might well exist for a few more years yet. But it does feel like they're at least taking it quite seriously in terms of helping down the divisions, because for so long the Premier League has just felt like a completely different planet to even the middle of the Championship. And also you look at the sides at the top of the Championship this year, and I can speak because one of them's mine in Sunderland, we are nowhere near ready for the Premier League. And I think West Brom fans would probably say the same as well. So it feels like whoever comes up next year, it might be a similar sort of story. Maybe Leeds will get in the picture, and maybe that's a slightly different matter. But for now, it does feel very, very difficult to survive as a newly promoted club in the Premier League. Before we wrap up, Sam, do you have any final thoughts, anything you'd like to add, or are you all done?
No.
Could you do a rallying cry for the newly promoted sides?
Look, just sort yourselves out, lads. You know, I mean, Ipswich, keep doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That win is coming, and your setup is great, and you're plucky, and you're aggressive, and you've got that underdog spirit and fever, and it suits you so well, and you don't need to do anything different. Just keep going, keep plugging away, ride the highs and lows of young attackers that will be good some weeks and bad the other weeks. But if you play anything like you played against Villa at the weekend, and well, you've been in every game, as you said, then keep going. Southampton, pick a formation, pick a striker. Pick a style of play, just get some fundamentals in there. And Leicester, have you got any slightly more athletic midfielders from the academy that can step in and help this ship, because they're not really competing?
Fair enough. I mean, Jack, as a veteran of many relegation scraps, and now, as we said, a fan of an established Premier League side, do you have anything to add?
Only that I actually am not completely convinced by Crystal Palace. And I know that sounds like a really easy thing to say, considering they haven't won a game yet. But more than that, what Glasner is doing in this midfield is weird.
Wait, Kamada at centre mid, what are you doing?
Yeah,
he knows him better than we do, so he must know something that we don't.
It's not allowing Wharton to get the best out of his game. Elise leaving is a massive, massive blow. I don't think Nketiah and Mateta can play together. And Ollie Glasner's teams do tend to start slowly, so a little bit of a pinch of salt with this. But Glasner also does tend to fall out with everybody. Every single club he goes into, Ollie Glasner falls out with. And it seems to be having this kind of effect on things. Now, I'm not saying that's the reason why loads of key players left Palace or wanted to leave Palace this summer. But without Anderson in that back line, they look more at risk, I think, and they're taking gambles on other players. Charlie Riyad was at Betis last year. I liked him, but I was surprised that someone spent that money on him at this point in his career. I think that there's a lot about that team that doesn't really make sense right now. And I'm not completely convinced that with Palace investing what they're investing every year, they're not going to be miles away from this. Because I can't see Palace going out in January, like you say with Everton, Dougie. I can see Everton going out and splurging to really kind of push this onwards. They do not want to be opening that stadium in the Championship. I can't see Palace doing that, even if things are not going well. And I wonder if there is just something in that squad not really kind of feeling like it's complete that might just let them get dragged into this.
I mean, when you enter the season under such a dark cloud and have all of your momentum from April and May stripped from you, in the form of transfer sagas or just straight up losses,
as well. Really recovered.
Like having all of that happening with Mark Gay and hanging over his head into the season, first couple of games, and he hasn't been great. Obviously, none of them have. Losing Elise, losing Anderson, losing your momentum more than anything. It's been a real sickener, and it's not a particularly hot take now because it's a month after the fact. But unless Mateta gets injured. And why did they sign Nketiah? They play with one striker, not his style of striker, and they lost Elise, and they're still not even playing Kamada in that position. They've played him deeper. I really, when you see a manager sometimes and they get inside their own head and they start doing weird stuff and it becomes a bit of a spiral, and Mourinho's famous for this. He starts doing not just weird outbursts, but weird systems, putting players in the wrong position, all that stuff. I saw it again in Russell Martin on Monday night against Bournemouth. I thought this team looks thoroughly unprepared to play Bournemouth. And I'm looking at Crystal Palace and I'm seeing the same thing. So, look, it's early days. You've got so many more bullets in the chamber in terms of let's fire the manager and bring in the new one. And you've got time to fire that one and bring in a third one if you need to, because we're only 6 in. There's a window in the middle of the season that you can buy players in if you need to. There's plenty to go here, but I think the Palace stuff is fair. The Palace criticism, or the Palace concern, let's call it concern, it's very fair. It's not just a slow start. I think it might be something worse.
Fair enough. There we have it. Some crumbs of comfort for the newly promoted sides. Watch out for Wolves.
For Ipswich.
Yeah. Watch out for Wolves. Watch out for Palace. We're not quite sure whether all is set there. Guys, thank you so much for listening to episode 5 of The Truth. That was Is It Now Impossible for Newly Promoted Clubs to Survive? Thank you so much to producer Jack.
You're very welcome, Dougie. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on board as ever. And thank you so much to Jetlag Sam, who performed very well indeed.
Thanks, buddy.
Absolute pleasure, guys. We will catch you next week. Goodbye.
Your dining room is the heart of your home, where meals are shared and memories are made. At Ashley, you'll find affordable dining furniture in a range of classic and modern styles. Ashley's small space sets and extendable tables are designed to fit beautifully into any space, from cozy breakfast nooks and kitchens to formal dining areas fit for a feast. And with mix and match seating options, everyone at your table gets the perfect seat. At Ashley, style is served. Shop in-store or online today.